up, guys? Welcome back to Zilla MMA. I am your host, as always, the Zilla. Want to start this episode by thanking you guys, as always, for watching. Please, if you're not subscribed, go subscribe now. Like the video. Leave some comments with your picks for the upcoming week. Based on last week, I might need your picks. Rough week last week. We'll start on that just because that's obviously the black cloud hanging over this right now. Didn't even bother to put out a recap video this week. Had time constraints for one, but didn't really make an effort to overcome those. Just with the circumstances of that card, probably my worst prediction card of my life. Certainly, if you've been watching the channel, easily, not even close, easily the worst one we've had since the channel's begun. And even outside of the channel, just as a casual viewer, I don't think I've done that poorly. Overall, went 4-8-1. The parlay hit, so that's a positive. Honestly, didn't get burned as bad gambling as we could have, being 4-8-1. You expect to lose everything with that. But we hit the parlay, which is the main bet I give out on here. The two dog plays we had both went 0-2. I really felt like those had the potential to go at least 1-1 there. I don't think those were even really that bad of plays, but didn't pan out for us there. Prizepicks 1-1-1. Obviously, no real format where that's a winner. That's unfortunate. Just a little off on that one. And then Lawson comes through with Lawson's luck. Thank God for Lawson for flipping us on that play. Ended up putting a good bet out on Lee in that fight. That saved me a lot there as well, but just overall really unfortunate. And there's a couple that I think could have gone our way. A couple where I don't think the analysis was necessarily wrong. Maxim against Charles Johnson. Charles Johnson just has an all-time fight for him. I didn't think that we were way off on that. Let's see. Dober put up a good fight. I thought he gave a good performance against Moicano, so I don't really feel that bad about the analysis on that one as well. And then there was one other one that I thought was where we got burned. Quinones, that is the one. I really thought he'd done enough to win that fight, in my opinion. We don't get the win there. That's really unfortunate. So, and then there's ones where my analysis was just plain flat out wrong. Garimbo obviously being one of them. Going out there, didn't have the confidence in his hands to be able to do something like that. Great performance for Garimbo. I can't take anything away from him for that. Molly McCann, for some reason, I thought Belbita would not allow herself to get ragdolled and manhandled like she did in the first fight. Completely wrong. Don't know why this fight even got rescheduled. Very easy for Molly McCann there. And I'll go ahead and shout out one of the commenters. I like to do this when you guys comment. I like interacting with you. This guy deserves it. He put it the best out of anyone that I'd seen all week. Francisco Fernandez, I hope you're watching this. Holy horrible picks. Jeez. Couldn't say it better myself. Just, embarrassingly bad picks. And it sucks. But as I told him in the comments, I did the analysis. We got burned. We hit a couple of the bets we needed to hit. And now we move on. And that's all there is to it. And you really hope coming off a card like that you'd be coming into a card with some big favorites, some can't miss spots. And this just really isn't that card. It's another pretty tough card if you ask me. But I did things a little differently this week. I always watch a good bit of film, and I normally go out and do some other reading and listen to some commentators. Kind of cut a lot of that out this week. I just watched film. I'm going off my own eye test. I'm understanding the fights as I see it, not as how someone else has analyzed it. It's usually good to get other input and understand where other people are coming from with these fights. But I just didn't want to be over-influenced after what happened last week. I've had a lot of success in my betting career in coming up with my own opinions and betting on the guys that I believe in. And so I'm getting back to those roots this week. Hopefully it pays off for us. But with all that being said, we can go ahead and jump into this card. First fight here is going to be Daniel Marcos versus Aoriqileng. Marcos coming in here as the minus 250 favorite. Marcos didn't look fantastic in his last fight against Davy Grant, but he was able to get the split decision victory, and I honestly feel a little bit that this is a little bit of a step backwards for him. I'm not sure Aoriqileng is quite to the caliber of a Davy Grant, in my opinion. He showed some things in the last fight that gave me a little pause when breaking it down. His volume's not great. He's looking to counter, and he's throwing a lot of single shots. He also kind of stands a little more straight up and down than I would like. You know, you normally leaves you susceptible to takedowns, getting hit in, taking a shot on the chin while you're leaning back. Don't love seeing all that. But it really hasn't become an issue for him yet, so I don't want to be overly critical of that. As far as the positives, though, he has some characteristics that I love seeing in a fighter that I'm backing. He's very strong defensively, great reflexes, uses them to find openings really effectively. He's always pumping out those calf kicks, looking to work the opponent's legs. That's always a big aspect for me that I love to see fighters who are going in and doing damage to the entire body of the fighter. I think he could be even more effective if he started fighting more behind that jab. I really liked when he was using it because it looks really good. But he wasn't pumping it out the entire fight. I would like to see him do that a little bit more. Aoriqileng, also a solid fighter, and certainly not a layup by any means here. He has the power to hurt Marcos, but with his defensive game, I really don't see him getting the shots through. I guess I'd also probably give him the grappling edge, but I really don't see either of these guys wanting to take this to the ground. I think it's probably going to be a straight up, standing fight. And I think Marcos is just going to be able to land more. And because of that, I think he's going to get the volume in every round and be able to coast to an easy decision here. So my pick here is going to be Marcos by decision. Moving into our next fight, we have Hyder Amil versus Fernie Garcia. Amil, the minus 185 favorite. And Amil coming off a Contender Series fight where he definitely did enough to earn his chance in the UFC, but he also kind of left me with some concerns just from watching the tape. The start of the fight, he was really impressive. Likes to keep pressure on his opponent. He starts really fast, which is obviously a positive as long as you're not gassing. He throws a bunch of volume, and fighting against an opponent who wants to grapple with him, he did a really good job countering it and even landing some takedowns of his own. But the concerns arose from his defense and his cardio. Those are really the aspects of his game that I'm a little bit worried about right now. I found him to be pretty hittable in a fight with a bunch of back and forth grappling exchanges. He found himself gassed pretty much about halfway through the second round, which is a little concerning to me. Almost the exact opposite fighter from Garcia's perspective. He fights a really reserved fight. Can land some impactful shots, but I feel like he's never really leading the fight, if that makes sense. We may see something different from him in here. He's 0-3 in the UFC. He really needs this if he wants to keep his job. But he's just a hard guy to bet on. I really don't see myself getting any money behind him. The most concerning thing for me is how he deals with takedowns. Even when Amil was gassed, he was able to move forward and fight in grappling exchanges, and I just haven't seen the ability from Garcia to be able to stop that. So I don't know what I think of Amil long-term in the UFC, but I definitely think he probably has enough to win this fight. So I'm going to take Amil here by decision. Next up, we have Zach Pauga versus Bogdan Guskov. Pauga minus 125. Kind of a tough call for me on this one. I'm still not really sure what to make of Guskov. He did get a really tough matchup for a UFC debut fighting Ozdemir. And before watching the tape, I'd forgotten the moments he had in that fight, to be honest. He landed some big shots that rocked Ozdemir. And there were a couple moments where it looked like he might be able to get the finish, to be honest. He was getting really close. The problems that I saw with him in that fight, though, his chin is at the very least questionable, and he doesn't appear to grapple very well. And this really is a guy where that could definitely become an issue. But Pauga isn't the best fighter on the feet on the other side. He has his flaws. he mixes up his shots well. He's always going to be that threat to get it to the ground. But the issue with him is how hittable he is. I just can't trust his defense. He stays on the center line, tends to dip his head when he goes in to throw, and it just leaves him open to some big shots. We've seen him eat some in the past. It's kind of concerning. I would say Pauga probably has the advantage if this gets out of the first round. But I think I'm going to take Guskov as a dog and get him to stop it before it gets there. I think it's a 50-50 shot on whether this leaves the first round or not. And I think if this is in the first round, it's Guskov for sure. So I'm going to take Guskov as our first dog here, and I'm going to take him by KO. Next up, we have Jeremiah Wells versus Max Griffin. Wells coming in here as the -170 favorite. So Max Griffin certainly has the striking to be in this fight. Hard hitter. I feel like he certainly has the power to finish this fight. The problem is I just don't feel like he uses it all that effectively. Griffin has trouble finding the range, and when he does, he fails to put together combinations and follow up on his big shots. He's kind of a single hitter, so that's not something you're going to be able to get away with against a guy with the power, the explosiveness, the speed that Jeremiah Wells has. Wells so effectively quickly closes the distance and sometimes uses that to land big wild shots, but more often than not, he's using it to land his takedowns. He should really be on a 7-fight winning streak, but ended up on the losing side of what was kind of somewhat a fluky anaconda choke in his last fight after controlling it for nearly 3 rounds. I don't think Griffin will have anything to stop that, so I expect Wells to maul him for 3 rounds, probably keep this on the mat for the most part, and I expect him to be able to get it done. So give me Wells in this fight by decision. Next up, Devin Clark versus Marcin Prachnio. Clark, the -220 favorite here, and I really believe Clark is the better fighter here, but I always kind of have trouble backing him. I always kind of get that second thought in my head because he just kind of lacks that fighting IQ, as much as I hate to say that about a fighter. But going back and watching the tape, we look back at his last fight with Kennedy Nzechukwu, for example, and there's multiple instances just in that fight where you see him struggling with that. He has Kennedy hurt, backed up against the cage, and just as, completely empties the tank, ends the round getting bombarded by elbows because he gassed himself out. Then recklessly charges Kennedy in the second round, ends up caught in a guillotine, and ultimately loses the fight. And it's a fight where he had every opportunity to win. And, I'm a huge Kennedy guy, and I can admit that Devin Clark looked like the better fighter for a good portion of that fight, but lost it due to that ring IQ. I mean, he does the damage, and he just completely empties the gas tank and ends up not having anything left to fight the fight. And, you don't see that from high-level fighters. And I'm not sure we can consider Devin Clark that yet. So, but the question is, does Prachnio have what it takes to take advantage of that? And I'm really leaning towards the answer being no. He does have an unorthodox karate style that could give Devin some problems, but this guy's no wonder boy. He has a pretty questionable chin, and even though he's somewhat decent in takedown defense, he really has no ground game. If Devin Clark can just stay out of his own way and fight the fight I think he should, he can land the bigger shots, he can manage control time. I really think he can grind this out on the mat and get the decision. So that's what I'm going to bet on. I'm hoping he can stay out of his own way, and I'm going to take Clark here by decision. Next up, we have the only women's fight on this card, on this 14-fight card. We have Loma Lookboonmee versus Bruna Brasil. Lookboonmee -260. I think this fight is a good bit closer than this line would lead you to believe. Watch tape on both these women this week. Bruna definitely has the edge in speed and might be able to take advantage of that if she can use it to use that reach that she's going to have and use that speed on the outside. I really do like what I've seen from her in the striking department. She mixes up shots well, uses kicks effectively, and knows how to use her speed to her advantage. The the issue is the power of Loma is pretty concerning coming into this, and she definitely throws some strong kicks of her own. But I really wouldn't be surprised if Brazil wins the exchanges on the feet here. She's a pretty technical striker. But the bigger issue is if this gets to the ground. Brazil is the bigger fighter, but Loma is just so much more powerful and explosive. She does a good job getting her opponents to the mat, and that's just not where Brazil wants to be. Loma not flawless, though. We saw her get reversed and struggle to keep control in her last fight against Elise Reed, but she's relentless and will keep chasing those takedowns against her opponent where she, especially in a fight like this where she thinks that she has a big edge on the ground. If Brazil can find a way to keep this standing in at range, I certainly give her a puncher's chance, but I think it's far more likely Loma will eventually get her on the mat and wrap up the neck. So I'm going to take Lookboonmee by submission in this fight. Next up, we have Bolaji Oki versus Timothy Cuamba. No line available for this one yet, and it's because Cuamba coming in here at the last minute as a replacement for Hadzovic. I actually had the analysis done on this, and I was all over Oki, but had to make a late scramble and get it fixed this morning. Looking at his fight against Cuamba, I just don't think this is quite as straightforward as the fight would have been otherwise. Surprisingly enough, both these guys fought on the same Contender Series card, not against each other. Both of them winning their fights, but Cuamba did not get the contract at the end of the night. You have to think that Cuamba is going to be coming in here with something to prove. Oki should certainly have a size and power advantage. He throws some really big shots and does a good job going to the body and doing damage with kicks. I would be a little worried about his lack of volume and how hittable he is, but he really seems willing, to take a shot, land a shot. And unless he feels his opponent hurt, I really haven't seen him throw the kind of combinations I'd like to see from him. There's also a good bit of unknowns in his grappling game. I haven't been able to determine where he stands with that based on the tape I've been able to find. There's not a whole lot out there. Cuamba, just really well-rounded. Very young, but seems pretty polished for his age. Throws some great combinations, mixes up his shots well, solid takedowns, solid takedown defense, grappling. I know I went on my rant last week about backing green fighters, and I still kind of feel that way to some degree, but I'm trying to get out of my own way and not let that hinder me. And honestly, you can have those same concerns with the type of talent that Oki's been fighting. It's not really of a higher caliber. The short notice could certainly play a factor here, but I feel like the kid is going to be ready. He has to feel slighted after not getting the contract, and feel like he deserved it and needs to come out here and prove something. He's coming off a knockout win just 5 days ago, so I know there's some risk with this, but I'm fairly certain Cuamba will be a dog once the line comes out, and I really just think he's a guy worth taking the chance on. I think he probably deserved a shot after his Contender Series fight, and I think he's ready to come out and prove that here. So I'm going to take Cuamba, honestly, as long as we get him as a dog. If something surprising happens here and for some reason Oki is not the favorite, which is not what I am expecting to happen, I'm going to take Cuamba by decision. Next fight, we have Trevin Giles versus Carlos Prates, minus 260 for him. Trevin Giles, just one of those guys where it's hard to predict what you're going to get from him. He's fought some top-level competition in his career, Bonfim, Duplessis, and even has that win over Delice, which, has aged very well. He's a solid all-around fighter, but I just feel like he regularly comes up with a bad game plan and allows his opponent to dictate the fights. The striking of Giles is solid. I really like when he uses the jab to establish the range, but Prates coming in here, the guy's a real killer. I realize he's coming off the Contender Series, but this guy's just not a new fighter. He's not he's not the type of green fighters that I'm talking about when I'm talking about guys like that. This guy has 23 professional fights, and even though it wasn't against UFC talent, I feel like you can hardly call this guy green at this point. He spent a lot of time in the octagon, and it shows in the confidence he fights with. He keeps his hands down low, which is certainly concerning to me, especially against a guy who has the potential to throw that jab out and do some damage, but it does allow him to throw from different angles, and it regularly catches his opponents off guard. Kind of similar, different, but the same logic that like Bobby Green uses in keeping those hands at his hips and hitting you with shots that you're not expecting. I've actually seen a lot of fighters that are tending to do that now. Positives and negatives that come from it. I think the best path for Giles here would be to wrestle. He isn't great at it, but he's much better in that area than his opponent. So that's probably his best path. Unfortunately, I think it's much more likely he stands and strikes, and I just don't see too many ways where he's able to go out there and get the victory on the feet here. He's just not going to win these striking exchanges. So give me Prates here by KO. Giles, certainly a live dog here, but we're going to take the other side. Next we have Rodolfo Vieira versus Arlen Petrosyan. Vieira, the very slight favorite here at -120. Rebooking from back in November. In my opinion, really hasn't changed much on how this should go. Went back and referenced my notes from that fight. Certainly no denying the jiu-jitsu game of Vieira, the way he's been able to use both his technique and that overwhelming strength he has on the mat. And it's in those elements alone, honestly, some of the best the UFC has to offer. But it's only one dimension of mixed martial arts, and he claimed before his last fight that he had improvements in his stand-up and wrestling, but I just haven't seen it. It's very difficult to back a guy whose main focus is jiu-jitsu when you don't have confidence in their ability to be able to get the fight to the mat. And that's amplified when you're facing a guy like Petrosyan, who has pretty solid takedown defense, in my opinion. Even when he does get taken down, he does a good job staying active, keeping himself out of danger. I still obviously won't feel good if this ends up on the mat at some point, but I think he can survive, especially if it happens late in a round. On top of that, I think Petrosyan really can hurt him with his boxing. The Brundage fight for Vieira, it's only going to show up on his record as a win by submission, but it was dangerously close to being a knockout for Brundage. I don't see Petrosyan making the same mistakes and letting a victory like that slip away. I think he'll be able to keep this fight mostly on the feet, where he should be able to be the clearly better fighter. So for me, I'm going to take Petrosyan here, a very slight dog by KO. Next up, we have Michael Johnson versus Darius Flowers. Johnson coming in here as the favorite at -125. This one's tough. Michael Johnson, undoubtedly one of the greatest resumes, craziest resumes at least, in the history of the sport. Don't get lost in that 21-19 record. This man has fought against Ferguson, Barboza, Dariush, Diaz, Poirier, Khabib, Gaethje, Fili, Emmett, Guida. The list goes on forever. And has a good amount of wins in those. I think he's like 4-6 in those fights, which, 4-6 doesn't sound great, but against those caliber of fighters, it's amazing. Has some losses against some lower caliber guys too, though. A really weird career when you look at it on paper. But this journey began back in 2010, and you have to start looking around and asking yourself how much time's left here. The last fight for Johnson really freaked me out. Just an absolutely brutal knockout that has me worried about his chin at 37 years old. You can only take so many fights like that at that age. And Flowers isn't the best striker in the world, but this guy has power. And in the first round, he's going to be in your face and coming forward, throwing kill shots. I'm a little worried about him making weight, and that could, throw this entire thing out the window. We could be talking about whether this fight's going to happen or not, or, how he looked on the scale. But I think there's a good chance he can catch Johnson early. I think a lot of people are putting a lot of stock into what happened in his last fight, which I believe was a short notice fight. Now, obviously, if this gets into the later rounds, Johnson could make me regret this. I think generally, as an overall holistic fighter, Johnson is probably still the better guy. But I think I'm going to have to side with Flowers here to get the early stoppage. I think we're getting close to the end for Johnson. I don't think he can take the kind of shots that Flowers can throw here. So I'm going to take Flowers here by knockout. Next up, we have Brad Tavares versus Gregory Rodrigues. Rodrigues coming in here, minus 245 favorite. Tavares, just another very seasoned vet of the UFC. Also been here since 2010, faced some of the best, but again, it's another fighter where you have to look around and say the end's probably coming soon. There can't be that much time left. He was able to break up a 2-fight losing skid with a win over Chris Weidman, but with the state Weidman was in and in that fight, it's really a tough look that he didn't get the finish there. I think everyone was expecting him to, and he did a great job stuffing the takedowns and working on the damaged legs of Weidman, but the power just isn't there for a guy who wants to keep it on the feet. You really expect him to have more than that, and in his 23 UFC fights, he only has 2 finishes. And that really makes me worried about him standing and begging with a guy like RoboCop, who 19 professional fights has only seen the third round 4 times. Tavares should be able to stuff the takedowns to avoid the scary ground and pound he has, but I still think this is RoboCop's type of fight where he should be able to get the win here. He's going to be able to land the more impactful strikes. So give me RoboCop here. I'm going to take him by knockout. Next, we have Ihor Potieria versus Robert Bryczek, I believe is how you pronounce his name. Bryczek minus 200. A bit of a confusing fight here because of the circumstances. Potieria fighting here on short notice and also moving down a weight class, which is really out of the ordinary. I'm not huge on Potieria. I was on Bellato against him a couple months ago. At that fight in Austin, which I attended, but he honestly was much better in that fight than I expected. Pretty solid on the feet, had some good ground and pound, but just wasn't able to get Bellato out of there before he gassed. I was also really impressed with his power, and it'll be interesting to see how well that translates to 185, because if he still has that kind of power in that weight class, I hate to say it, he could be pretty dangerous there. I haven't loved the tape I've seen on Bryczek. Certainly can hit hard, but I really think Potieria has better technical striking. This really just comes down to how Potieria looks on the scale for me. For now, I'll side with Potieria to get the knockout, but obviously that could change if he misses weight or if I see him struggling on the scale this week. But I think Potieria is the better of these two fighters. Pending a knockout, pending anything that looks bad this week as far as weigh-ins and that kind of thing. It's one we'll keep our eye on for sure, but for the show, I'm going to take Potieria by KO. That gets us to the co-main, Dan Ige versus Andre Fili. Ige minus 175. Pretty sure Fili is a Zilla Heroes fighter. He's on the Zilla Heroes list. As well as another fighter coming up. This is certainly a really close fight for me. Ige should have probably a bit of a power edge here, and even if Fili had the power edge here, it really wouldn't matter. Ige has that chin made of steel, so the knockout really isn't in play here unless something has changed between now and his last fight. But other than that, I really feel like Fili has the edge in a lot of other departments. I can't figure out why everyone is counting Fili completely out here. And maybe it's just because I am a big Fili fan, and maybe it's because I know it might be now or never for him if he wants to make a real, serious title run in the UFC. But I truly believe he's made a lot of improvements. The fight IQ looked way up in his last fight, And I think if he fights smart, he should be able to give Ige some real problems. Uh, he has a reach advantage, so he should be able to touch him up from the outside and stay out of range, um, which will help him avoid a lot of that power that Ige is going to be looking to use. And when Ige does close the distance, Fili has some really underrated wrestling, which is something I think, he could take advantage of. Ige has historically struggled with that. The knockout threat is there from Ige, and I don't mean to take anything away from him, but I am a Fili believer, and I think he has what it takes to get it done here. I think there's a lot of hate coming Fili's way this week that I think isn't justified. I haven't seen a lot of people going with him, even though the odds are fairly close here. I'm going to side with my guy. I'm going to take Andre Fili here, and I'm going to take him by decision. And finally, we have our main event, Jack Hermansson versus Joe Pyfer. Pyfer minus 250 here. And I'm going to say it. I don't get all the Pyfer hate this week. I think it's crazy. I've seen a bunch of it and I know I said I'm not listening to all the outside people this week, but it's one of the main things I've been hearing. I see a lot of people saying this is a big dog spot and they want to back the experience of Hermansson. You aren't going to hear that here. This is a Joe Pyfer show, and I say to hell with all that experience stuff. It doesn't matter to me. I know I've talked about not backing green fighters. This isn't a green fighter. He may not have faced top tier talent yet in his career. I don't care. I've seen what this guy is capable of. Now, could Hermansson have a slight edge in volume? Does he have better jiu-jitsu? Is it competitive in wrestling? Could you even give Hermansson the edge in wrestling? Sure. Is he better than the rest of competition that Pyfer's fought to this point? Probably so. But what have you seen in Pyfer's fights that makes you want to go against him? I really don't understand where this is coming from. The guy has unreal power, clean striking, solid wrestling, shown no signs of being beatable up to this point. Why on earth would I not be on the hype train? I don't get it. I feel like this is one of those spots where people are trying too hard to find a reason not to like Pyfer. I'm not going to bite this week. Give me Pyfer to keep the show going and win this fight. And I think he's going to get a knockout that will wake up a bunch of these haters. So the pick is Pyfer by knockout. And with that, we will get into our confidence rankings for this week. Pyfer, my most confident pick. I know a lot of people, you're going to see a lot of people this week taking Hermansson. I just believe in the guy. I think he's the real deal. Everything I've seen from him has been fantastic to me. I don't see any reason to go the other way. He's going to be my most confident pick. Wells, probably the most value of the week. I've seen him around minus 165. I think he's definitely the better fighter in that fight. Definitely someone I'm going to be getting behind. Amil, Marcos, Rodrigues, all pretty safe bets as well in my book, as safe as they get. Obviously, there's no such thing as a safe bet in this sport, especially guys at these lines this week. We don't have the minus 400s, minus 500s. Did we even touch minus 300 this week? They're close lines. And so, take that with a grain of salt when I say they're high confidence picks. And then we have Clark, Petrosyan, Fili, Prates, all in that middle category. And then our more dog-like plays down at the bottom, things that I think are a little bit more of a toss-up. And then we can go ahead and get into our bets for this week. We'll go ahead and start with our parlay for this week. It's going to be Pyfer and Wells, those two top guys here. Like I said, Wells, so much value at minus 165. Pyfer, being a good guy to combine with that, gets you to plus 122. And then, as usual, we have two dogs for this week. Petrosyan, you're getting at even odds right now. A guy I think should be the slight favorite here is instead the slight dog, so I see the value there. And then with the Fili fight, I've told you I'm a Fili guy. I think Touchy Fili is a very good fighter. That should be much closer to, and it's fairly close as it is, but I feel like that should be an even fight, so I will take the plus 150 value there. And then we'll get into our prize picks. First one we're going to go with, and we have 3 plays this week as we usually try to. We're going to go with Rodolfo Vieira, less than 2.5 takedowns. I know that's what he's going to want. I know that's what he's going to try and do. He wants to use that jiu-jitsu. 2 things getting in the way of that. Vieira, not great at takedowns in my opinion, and Petrosyan, very good at takedown defense. Also, on the off chance this gets to the ground, like, unless it's at the end of a round, I would think people who are backing Vieira would think he'd be getting the finish down there. That would be the end of the fight. So I don't really get why this line's at 2.5. I think it should be more like a 1.5 type line. So I'm gonna take the under on that. Next we have Gregory Rodrigues fight time. I'm going under 12.5 minutes. As I said, Rodrigues only seen the third round 4 times in his career. If you're backing Tavares, probably not a good bet for you. He is a decision fighter, but me thinking Rodrigues is going to be able to get him out of here, I'm going to back him and back under 12.5 minutes in this fight. And finally, we've talked about him the whole show, pretty much it feels like. We've got Joe Pyfer. I'm going to take his over fantasy score. I think he's going to have a dominant performance here. You can make this number whatever you want. I'm on board for it. But that is going to do it for my plays. And we are now up to the point of your favorite segment and one that's very important to this show. Starting off 1-0, hopefully we're getting another winner from him. It is time for Lawson's Lock of the Week. All right, so we welcome back Lawson for number 2 of Lawson's Lock of the Week. We start the series 1-0. First week you have one in what was just an abysmal card for me all around. I mean, you've known me for a long time, and we've talked about fights long before I started this program. That's probably the worst we've ever had it. Just pretty close to it. And having you turn around that one fight for me made all the difference of me completely losing it and staying afloat. So thank you for that. Obviously, this is a value. I love that you are able to take a deep dive into one fight like this. And so hopefully we can start this thing off 2-0. So without further ado, Lawson, go ahead and take over here.
So my pick of the week, first off, dominant performance by Lee last week. Kind of did exactly what I thought he was going to do. Stuff the takedowns. It looked like Builder wanted to hold him up against the fence. And he showed great offense being held up against the fence, doing damage while, he was just holding him the whole time. So the elbows and the punches were doing damage. So shout out to Lee getting us to 1-0. Moving on to this week, I'm taking Michael Johnson over Darius Flowers. I think that the odds are completely wrong. He should be a much heavier favorite. I think Darius Flowers is an absolute bum. I'm going to be completely honest. I have not seen anything in watching film that gives me any confidence that this guy's a UFC fighter.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about what you were seeing in Michael Johnson at this point that has you feeling this confident in him as a fighter.
So he's he's getting a little bit older. However, in his last fight, he looked really good to start the fight. I mean, in round 1, he definitely won round 1. He was laying the lumber. He kind of just got caught in the second round and got starched, which, I mean, it was brutal. I mean, he was out cold. But
I think he was literally snoring.
Yeah, he was snoring. But like I said, like, he looked good. He fought well. He just got caught that one time, and I really don't think that Darius Flowers is going to catch him. I will also say this: Darius Flowers was fighting at a welterweight last fight. He's down fighting at lightweight now, and the announcers even made a comment that he had put on weight before the last fight, like in between weigh-ins and the fight, kind of mentioning that the weight cut might have been a little bit difficult for him to get down to welterweight. But now him fighting that lightweight, if he was having trouble cutting weight to get to the last weight class, then might be even harder for him now. I will also say he looked completely undisciplined in his last fight. I mean, he was just going out there he gassed himself early. I mean, he was out of breath probably within the first 2 minutes of the fight, kind of just throwing, whatever. And it kind of showed in the second round. There was a low blow that everyone thought might have caught him in the, below the belt, but it didn't. It really kind of caught him in the gut. It looked like he was just kind of trying to put on because he knew he was getting beat. And then he ended up, getting knocked down and then ended up getting submitted. So I really think this is an easy choice. I think, Michael Johnson could have definitely won his last fight, just got caught. And I think that, if Darius Flowers comes out and he is fighting undisciplined, Michael Johnson definitely has the striking ability to put him out. And I think that he will, if that's the fight that he chooses to fight.
So I'll go ahead and tell you where I am with this. So this is another one that's at the bottom of my confidence things. I've gone back and forth. Officially on the show, I had Flowers, but made it very clear that I was uh wishy-washy on it. And here's why at this point. Number one, very concerned about Michael Johnson's chin at this stage in his career, 37 years old. Uh and like I said earlier in the video, don't get lost in that 21-19 record the guy has. I mean, he's fought the who's who of UFC. I've already gone over the list. I'll go over it again. Ferguson, Barboza, Dariush, Diaz, Poirier, Khabib, Gaethje, Fili, Emmett, Guida, and that's just like the 10 most notable people. This guy has all the ring experience in the world. But fighting guys like that takes a toll on you over your UFC career. And doing this since 2010 and getting a brutal knockout like that one. I think he had one not too long ago, maybe like 2019, 2020 against Josh Emmett as well. Those kind of things start to take a toll on you. And with Flowers, in my opinion, he is obviously not very talented. Not top tier UFC. Not but he's bottom of the barrel if he belongs there at all. I agree with you 100% on that. My concern is if there is a positive to have about Flowers, it's that early in the fight he can come with some power. He's kind of reckless, and he throws caution to the wind. But if one of those shots lands, um, I'm a little concerned that Johnson is not in a state where he can eat something like that at this point in his career. I said very clearly in the video that if it got into the later rounds, I certainly favor Johnson, but I'm a little worried about him facing that barrage of punches coming early in the fight.
And I agree completely. Like I said, he got caught one time in that last fight. And I mean, he went out. So I can agree with that analysis 100%. I haven't seen anything from Flowers that this is kind of like the fight from last week. Like I didn't have much confidence in Builder and I had more confidence in Lee. I think that I really don't have any confidence in Flowers. So I think that, Michael Johnson wins this fight. But like I said, he could definitely get caught. And that's MMA. That's the UFC.
And there's no arguing Flowers did not look good in that last fight. And out of fairness to him, I believe that was a short notice fight. I'm not 100% sure on that. I believe he took that on short notice. So I'll be curious to see what he looks like in this fight here. But I completely understand where you're coming from. There's not a guy who has faced a higher level of competition in the UFC. Literally, I don't think there's anyone ever. Like he's that list of names is possibly the best resume, and he's 4-6 in those 10, which with those 10 fighters is fairly impressive.
Mm-hmm.
And with all that being said, I mean, he certainly there's a thing with that people say about him, and it's that he's one of those fighters that's capable of beating anybody in the UFC and losing to anybody in the UFC. It's just the type of fighter he is. And so I've seen a lot of people on Johnson this week, and I completely understand that. I'm gonna stay on my side this week. I'm gonna let us go a little head to head here. But
All right.
that being said, I think we both completely understand where each other is coming from with our reasoning for these picks. Um, if if this somehow gets out of the first round, I think this actually has the potential to be a really good live betting spot if the books aren't up to date with these fighters. If Flowers goes out there and comes close to finishing Johnson at some point in the first round and becomes the favorite going into the second, I think it's time to hammer Johnson at that point. And that might be how I play it. I might have
Yeah.
Flowers straight up to start the fight, and if this gets past the first and I can get dog money on Johnson, I'm going to hedge out and take him.
Yeah, that's great analysis.
Well, awesome, Lawson. I wish you the best of luck, to be honest. Hopefully, we're having a total bounce back on this card.
Absolutely.
Um, anything else you've looked at on this card that interests you at all? Just any input, or have you been focusing in on this
I
fight?
looked at a little bit. I kind of told you that like I'm trying to, for my pick, I'm trying to keep it like anyone under minus 200 odds. I'm not trying to like give any like heavy favorites. There's a few heavy favorites that I would definitely lean towards, but I'm trying to keep it as close to, good value as I can.
Agreed. Well, Lawson, as always, we appreciate you. We hope this hits, and we look forward to hearing from you next week.
Absolutely. And even though we're on different sides, I'm going to be tailing you on everything else.
Absolutely, man. Appreciate you.
Yep.
All right. Thank you again to Lawson. Really appreciate having you on the show. Love getting that winner from you and you swinging me in the first week. Just an amazing start for the segment. Obviously, we're going to keep that running. So appreciate you, Lawson. Big part of the show here. But that's going to do it, guys. Hoping for a big rebound this week. If I didn't make it clear in the beginning of this episode, I take this very seriously. I take it personally that we did that poorly. And I've done everything in my power to set us up for success to bounce back from that this week. Hoping for the best. But we'll see how it goes, guys. I'm really looking forward to it. Gonna get the recap video out afterwards. Hope we gave you guys a little more time this week. Obviously, we got that video out late last week. Hopefully, this gives you a little more chance to get the better lines and get your bets in and do what you do with this information. But as always, really appreciate you guys, the viewers. Please like and subscribe so we can keep growing this channel. Leave some comments with your picks. Love hearing the input of other people. But yeah, guys, that's going to do it for this episode. Until next time, see ya.